Welcome back to the Restaurant Technology Guys podcast. I thank everyone out there for joining us. As I say each and every time, I know that you guys have got lots of choices on how you guys spend your time and energy, so we appreciate you guys spending time with us. Today, I am joined by two very special guests, and it's always fun when I get the opportunity to have two co-founders on the show. And we can talk a little bit about what they get to do, but it's even better when they get to talk about how this whole thing came together. So I'm going to let Paul introduce himself, then he can bounce it over to Michael.
So my name is Paul Molinari. I am co-founder and CMO of Popcorn GTM. We're a new kid on the block, well, a couple of old kids swinging around with a new solution for restaurant technology. And this is my partner, Michael.
Hey guys, I'm Michael Beck here. I am a co-founder as well, and I guess you call me a chief revenue officer for Popcorn GTM. This is such a great opportunity, Jeremy, to have us on the show.
And Paul, I know you alluded to it. You guys have been in and around the industry. Just for those that haven't run into you guys elsewhere, why don't you guys talk a little bit about your background? Paul, you and I met, I don't know, 5 or 6 years ago. I know we were talking about it before we hit the recording button when you were at your previous role. And Michael, you and I have known each other since before you moved 3,000 miles away to the opposite coast when we were both living in California and we both escaped. So, Paul, why don't you talk a little bit about your history, just because I think
Sure.
it'll play well into the conversation we have about what Popcorn's trying to do to solve industry issues.
Yeah, absolutely. My career is funny.
Hmm.
Before my previous role, I was the head of marketing at Crunch Time from 2013 to 2021. So the better part of a decade. I helped Crunch Time really go to market and not just go to market, but win a substantial amount of business over a period of time where they were kind of locked in a startup mode for many
Hmm.
years. What I would help the company do was essentially position themselves as the back office solution for restaurants and tell a story about how back office solution can really help save on inventory and food labor costs. But before that, I had worked in advertising agencies and consumer electronics and automotive and healthcare, working for brands like General Motors, AstraZeneca, Thomson Reuters, large consumer electronic chains like Tweeter. And so my career had kind of prepared me for helping a crunch time break through. And and so it was a pretty amazing ride. And I think what a lot of restaurant technologies go for, at least what they can only hope for, is to, capture some lightning in a bottle and understand, kind of what that lightning is and why it's so attractive to restaurant brands and to be able to package it and tell that story and have it resonate. And so found some success with Crunch Time. And, during that time, actually, is when I met Michael kind of across the aisle as a competitor.
Yeah, no, and that was where I was gonna parlay that, 'cause funny enough, Michael, when you and I met, you were competing with Paul's previous organization, Crunch Time, at formerly, I think, Restaurant Magic was what it was called at the time, Restaurant Magic Data Central. So, for those that don't know your history, I'm probably more familiar with your total history than I am with Paul's, but I know at least when it started in hospitality, I know that you started on the restaurant side and then turned into tech. So why don't you give everybody a little bit of a background before we jump straight into popcorn and what you guys are doing to help restaurant tech brands?
Yeah, and if you go way back, my family lived like Bob's Burgers. We grew up above the restaurant in Long Beach, California, at a little place on the peninsula. And my dad would make the food, and we'd go down and help out in the restaurant and go back upstairs to our own little quote unquote sitcom. And then so for my whole life, the food has been part of this. My family's had bars and growing up and worked in restaurants my entire life. And then out of the army, I decided to go be a chef and use my GI Bill to go to culinary school. And then somewhere along the way, I had a catering company, and somewhere along the way, a market crashed and things I was selling for high prices weren't quite the same. And so I decided to go into restaurant tech. And that long twisted road took me to where we are right now. I think the funny thing is every time I sit down with Paul and we start talking about the origin story, and I get to hear him talk about him being in the leading back office platform in the industry. And I'm like, wait a minute, that's me. I was in leading back office platform in the industry. And that's really such a cool Genesis kind of thing. So we're both scrapping it out at our respective companies. And like you said, we'd known each other loosely along the way, but both of us were fighting the battle of our lives in a sense, right? Everything's big when it's in your yard. It's I was thinking about how we were selling restaurant. It was the battle of the ages between Restaurant Magic and Crunch Time.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so we'd go after business and they'd win it, and they'd go after business and we'd win it. And it'd be this back and forth. And so you even came up with this fun analogy about Ralph and Sam, the Wile E. Coyote and the sheepdog analogy. The shepherd's out there tending the flocks, and the coyote and the sheepdog cordially punch in and say, "Morning, Ralph, morning, Sam."
Yep.
And all day long, they kick the living crap out of each other. And at the end of the day, they're battered and bruised. The coyote's the one that's
Night,
battered and
Ralph.
bruised. And evening, Ralph, evening, Sam. And that's always who we were. We'd always been really cordial and professional, but we also were highly competitive. And that mix is interesting. And when Paul was talking about how Crunch Time was kind of at a plateaued stage, it was the same thing for Restaurant Magic. And this is a story that you'll hear over and over again. You have these great brands that are out there doing good work, and they hit this cruise control moment. And both of us experienced that on Restaurant Magic. They'd been around for 10 years and they were where they weren't, it didn't seem like they were going to any big growth moves. And that was also the same thing that was happening in parallel at Crunch Time. And that kind of what brought us here is that we both, as a result of the teams we were on and the chemistry in that moment,
Yeah.
because you can't claim it all yourself.
Yeah. No, there's
Right.
nothing gets done in a vacuum. You guys both know that. And I know
Yeah.
both of you guys
Yeah.
well enough to recognize that you guys are beholden to the team that you guys were working with to make sure, and both found really good success. That's the cool part. And Beck, I know you and I talked offline about how you guys have known each other. You guys have been in different businesses. You guys have watched people fail. You guys have watched people succeed. You guys have watched founders struggle to even get out of their own way in both organizations, quite frankly, that we just talked about at times. And then other times they found better ways to solve those things. Where did popcorn come from? Beck, I'm gonna give it to you for a second. Why don't you talk a little bit about where did popcorn come from? Because I think it's a cool origin story. And you guys, I always love talking to founders that have scratched an itch that they've seen for some period of time out there, and they're really solving real world problems of things that they've seen and or experienced on their own.
Yeah, thanks. It's interesting because when you look back, it's hard to actually see the moment in time unless you look at it a couple of times in the rearview mirror. At first, you think it was Paul on LinkedIn, like 5-6 months ago, shared this thing about blur, no blur, right? It was hashtag no blur. And as somebody who has an office the way I
do.
this is a pretty heavy duty subject for me, right? Because I have a literal museum of comics behind me for anybody that's watching. And you got to start making some deliberate choices with who you're going to get on. When you get on a conference call and I'm on with the CFO, I'm tempted to blur it because they might not make the best impressions about my financial decisions. And so Paul had written this thing about blur and no blur, and I chimed in and we started talking about it. And that kind of stimulated a conversation.
Well, I think that, just carrying on for no blur for a second, the impetus for the article was about connection. And so much of our meetings nowadays are over, a Zoom call. We're constantly in a conference call mode and we're seeing each other on camera. And I had always felt, was kind of secretly disappointed when I would get on with a call and I'm talking to somebody that has a blurred out background or maybe just a computer generated background. And disappointed in the sense that it's a choice they make, of course, but I just kind of wanted to peek into their world a little bit more. I saw it as an opportunity to connect with people, particularly during a time when we're not in the office as much, we're not really connecting on a daily basis with each other physically. And so that's kind of like why I wrote the article. And it was funny because I had posted it and it went quasi viral. Like I had around 600 comments.
Anybody that's ever run a restaurant knows the craziness that happens during a meal period in a rush. One of our partners, Restaurant Technologies Total Oil Management Solution, is an end-to-end oil management system that delivers, filters, monitors, and recycles your cooking oil, taking one of the jobs that none of your team wants to do and takes it off your hands, allowing your team members to focus on their guest. Control the kitchen chaos with Restaurant Technologies and make your kitchen safer while maximizing your staff's time. The solution can be provided at no upfront cost. If you want to learn more, please check out rti-inc.com or call 888-796-4997.
That's
wow.
About it. And it really kind of stirred people up. And so that was, and that's where Michael and I reconnected because we do kind of share similar philosophies there. this is who we are. And what makes, I think, popcorn special, the peanut butter in my chocolate, as, Michael would like to say, is that, you know, I'm marketing.
Mhm.
That my entire career, I've been in this, I've been in marketing for over 25 years. Michael's been in sales for almost 30 years. That's what we do. And we both understand that when sales and marketing are together in lockstep, it's a much more powerful tool, right? So the purpose of popcorn, the why do we exist? So we want to deliver bold, intentional, disrupt sales and marketing strategy, either to help restaurant technologies break through and win.
And that
That's why we get up in the morning. We want to take our superpowers
Mhm.
and lend them out to, the founders and co-founders out there of these great ideas they're stuck in the weeds. They're trying desperately to get noticed, to tell their story, to prove their methods.
Yeah. And that's actually how we started is my last company, we had a partner and they were actually struggling they were doing great with our partnership, but they kept coming back asking about how do I do this? How do I do that with regard to sale? What are your thoughts here? And so at one point they were looking for help in a sense and said, listen, can you look at my and see how I'm doing and what our pipeline looks like? And it turned out the pipeline wasn't really real. There wasn't much there to see. And if you scratched beyond the surface, you knew there wasn't a lot of activity. And then the next conversation was, what are you doing for marketing? And at this point, Paul and I were already talking and sharing best practices on AI and different things. And that no blur conversation had evolved to more just talking about stuff. And so I said, hey, would you mind if we brought in somebody that I think could really give a good look at this from a marketing perspective? And that's literally the moment when Paul came in and we started collaborating in the sense and realized at the end of that conversation, we had something we could do for other businesses in that sense.
Right.
That's the literal moment popcorn happened.
That's awesome. That's awesome. I guess I use this analogy from time to time. I'm gonna double click a little bit on that topic because I've heard my entire career, which does span back close to 30 years myself, is this whole idea of some really good product sits on the shelf and doesn't ever get into the hands of the people that it needs to. And I think that's both a sales and marketing problem. I also think it's a restaurant tech adoption problem. So why don't we talk through? I feel like we've got a good idea of where we're going and what you guys are trying to solve for. But talk to me a little bit about the headwinds that you guys struggle with as you guys have even experienced it in your previous roles. What are those headwinds? Is it restaurant operators? Is it restaurant technologists? Talk to me a little bit about kind of those headwinds and why you guys think that you guys have a unique way that you guys can solve some of those problems for people.
Yeah, I'll take a stab at that, Michael, if
Go ahead.
first. So I think we need to first set the stage for what restaurant technology companies are up against. The reality is that I think Britta from Vita Partners has this really great circle, this wheel, right,
Hmm.
with about 250 logos in it. And
Yep.
it's labeled, the restaurant technology ecosystem rather.
I'd
And
put that up on screen just for backdrop.
Yep.
terrific. Right. So this is a pretty crowded marketscape, but here's the thing. This is only the top 250 restaurant technology companies. The reality is that there are well over, heck, if you go inside of Zoom Info and you type in hospitality technology, you'll have over 14,000 companies,
Yeah.
literally over 14,000. But, when we're creating this slide, I was like, I couldn't in good conscience rate
It was too big a
14,000 because it
number.
was just like,
Yeah.
it's like insane. So even if you were to be extremely conservative and say there are 4,000, hospitality technology companies out there that are helping restaurant brands and the like, that's a gigantic obstacle to overcome. But again, to even break through into the top 250, all of these folks are, they're all being pigeonholed into these different categories. There are these finite, Michael, if we could just go back to the other slide,
Yep.
there are these finite categories
Yeah.
that our companies are being wedged into. And the reality is that they have to, in some ways, adopt that. okay, you might be a point of sale that does, you know, AI voice and chat and inventory management and everything else, but you have to be known as a point of sale,
Yeah, who
company,
are
right?
you?
Yeah.
So it's kind of like, who are you? How are you positioned? What is your unique value proposition? Why should companies even care? There's a lot to it. There's a lot going on there. And what makes it all the more, in some ways, insurmountable is that every single one of these companies are all vying for the same eyeballs. They're all
Yeah.
looking for the same stakeholders. So it's 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 a daunting task. It's an extremely daunting task for a founder or even co-founders to try to overcome and to do it all. Right. So that's where I think, your story, your reason for being, it needs to really resonate.
Yep.
You have to make that visceral connection with the target or, with your audience. And that's what we're helping them do.
And you've got to
Which,
cut through the noise because, to your point, Paul, there's 14,000 different options out there of different tech. And I've said this a number of times. Our average client, and for those that know me outside of Restaurant Technology Guys podcast, I work at a company that sells restaurant technology.
yeah,
And so with that, our average client has 11 pieces of tech that we integrate to. That's outside of the tech that we don't integrate to. So every restaurant probably has 20 pieces of tech within their brand that they're having to manage and having to deal with. And so just on the point of sale side, we've got an average of 11 different connectors that we have to connect, whether that be to the back office, like where you guys both used to work, or so even getting the message out there. And then secondarily, having the value proposition, which I think is really where Beck comes in, after they hear about the message and know that they have the problem and know that the solution even exists, number one, and number two, has a way to solve it. Michael, on the CRO side, you guys help get them to a place where they can adopt that technology and understand the value proposition. Let me just take a step back because I think it's something that a lot of our listeners know intuitively, but we don't necessarily talk about it all the time. Talk about why there's 14,000 pieces of tech in restaurants are huge. Hospitality is huge, and people don't completely comprehend it. People don't comprehend the breadth of just even the domestic States restaurant market. And some estimates say there's upwards of 700,000 food service venues in the United States. I guess talk to me a little bit about that, Tam, and why you guys think that getting things out there to these segments. Yeah, Beck, I know for those audio listeners, why don't you talk through this slide a little bit? Because I think it's important for people to comprehend how much of a penetration food service has in the world today, because I don't think people truly understand it that are out listening that might be running a bar and grill in Des Moines, Iowa, that they've got just their single restaurant, and then they might not understand how large and how big of a breadth of the industry it is.
Yeah, it's an absolute massive market, right? It was the 10th largest employer in the United States. There are some 846,000 plus locations out there that are operating as restaurants. And if for those that are looking at the illustration, we have it broken down into three segments, right? Segment one are companies that are between 21 locations and 100 locations, and in that there's 70,000 businesses that are out there doing that. Right? And then the next level up, you have about 348 companies. The slices get smaller, but the businesses get bigger, right? So you have 348 companies that control 75,000 locations of business. And then you have at the very top of the spectrum, or what we all call tier one, there's 152 companies that have 617 or so thousand locations that they're managing. And the reality is all of them are in a different part of their journey.
Mm-hmm.
All of them look at the world differently, right? The ones that aren't even in these sliced off segments, the independents, you call them, the 1 to the 20s, they're in a different conversation and a different way of looking at things. So if I'm a technology company and I want to talk to these guys, right, and I'm trying to break through, I have to speak the language for each section, right? And we hear things like buyer personas and things like that. But what the reality is, if you look at somebody in their journey as a business, they just think differently, right? Before you have 50 locations, you think about the world differently. After you have 50 locations, you think about the world differently. And so these guys in segment one, they're just about to get over the hump, and they're just about to explode and enter that growth mode. And that's the golden number when they get there. And so they probably have some attributes that are common, right? They're probably founder led still. The founder's definitely in the mix. They are starting to dabble.
that's right. And even though you have a technology solution that may be appropriate for anybody in any of these three segments, the conversation and the messaging needs to be different
Yeah.
for each of these things, because they're thinking of it differently in the way that Michael just articulated. The number of stakeholders goes up. So, the rationale for your solution needs to be communicated differently to the different stakeholders. It's a formula. I mean, it's a lot of work. It's not easy. Particularly, you can have the greatest idea in the world and the greatest solution without having proof point, without having success. It's going to be a very difficult and rough road to break through, to go up the ladder to, the rarefied air of the large enterprise. And it's going to be different, frankly, for everybody. It's
Mhm.
not that there's no cookie cutter here. You have to take into account, what the brand is, what that flavor is that you're bringing to the equation, and how you want to be represented and how you want to tell your story. But the key is, consistency, and doing it in a way that resonates with each and every one of these targets.
Then for tech companies too, they have to be honest about their products.
Yeah.
Like really, because that literally changes the TAM, SAM, and SOM if we like these great acronyms, right?
Mhm.
Because your serviceable market is going to be different than your attainable market because of what you sell.
Yep.
Right.
Yep.
And then that has to also fit.
And I think your guys' unique background, having been in the space for quite some time, you guys get that all of these integration touch points also need to talk to each other. Because if they don't, they run into this tech spaghetti where nothing talks to each other, and ultimately it's a point solution that was brought in by marketing. It was a point solution that was brought in by operations. It was a point solution that was brought in by finance, and it doesn't talk to anybody else. The second thing that I'd love to talk a little bit about, because I think it's critical for us to talk through, is that some of these founders, they look at that last segment, Beck, that you had up there, and they go, "Oh, I'm only going to talk to somebody if they're 400 stores or more," not realizing that
Have you ever done 400?
yeah. Number one, have you ever done 400? Have you ever sat in the boardroom because those are board level decisions when you're talking
Yeah.
to a 500 store chain.
That's right.
They oftentimes aren't just somebody that's going to be like, "Oh yeah, let me throw in your new AI solution because you're a really smart guy from Harvard or from Yale or from."
That moment where their heat, energy, and intention that brings to life that idea that's been sitting there dormant that the founder had and has been carrying around with him. How do we break it out of its shell?
Yeah.
And it's not from inside. It's an outside influence that stimulates that and creates that energy and creates that chemistry and brings it all together. It's not saying the founder can't do it, but the founder needs to be a visionary.
Yeah.
He needs to keep doing what got him there and fire himself from so many of the things that he's holding on to tightly.
And I'm going to try and wrap here just for a couple minutes because we're getting close to time. And I just know from the stats that people about 45 minutes in, they start to tune out. But we went through a very similar process about a year ago within our own business. And interestingly enough, and I want to talk through both our experience, and it wasn't with Popcorn because Popcorn at the time didn't exist. And so we, maybe something later, but I think that idea of truly looking in the mirror, but giving an honest look of ourselves in the mirror. We all look at the mirror every day, brush our teeth, look at the hair in my goatee continues to get more and more gray as time goes on. But just in general, we look in the mirror and we get used to what we're seeing. Bringing in somebody else from the outside and truly having an objective view of how you are seen internally, who you think you are, and then what your customers and what the world see about you. Who are those other people that you're competing with and the other 14,000 people out there? And then how do you get your message to resonate as clearly as possible, both on the sales and the marketing side, is what we were able to experience. Talk to me a little bit about what that looks like, because it has been transformative for our sales team and our marketing team and our messaging to be really clear as to who we are, how do our clients see us, how does the market see us, who are those people that we're up against and we're fighting against, to deliver that message both on a sales and a marketing effort to truly start to accelerate at least what the image is. A lot of people think about marketing and sales as a lot of the old analogies is marketing is just posting a bunch of stuff on social media or having an email campaign that goes out, and sales is buying people nice dinners and drinking a glass of wine together. But you guys know in today's day and age, that is not at all what this is. And so I'd love for you guys to talk through that, because I think it's really critical for people to understand there is so much more that goes into it. People are inundated with 10,000 different messages every day, all day, whether it be through social, through their web browser, through television. You need to cut through the noise to get clear on who you are and what problem you're solving, both on the sales and marketing sides. Paul, I'm gonna pass it back to you, and then you can pass it to Michael to round us out on not only how critical it is to do these things, and I guess even quite frankly challenge me if there's stuff that I missed on what we're doing. I'd love to understand that because I think there's a lot of people that are going to be listening that don't get it and haven't gone through this journey that we most recently have.
Yeah. Thank you, Jeremy. And you know what? You're right. It's what it goes back to what we said earlier, that it's not easy, but it should be the easiest thing in the world. Because the reality is that every company out there knows exactly what they do. A lot of company understand how they do it, but a lot of companies, actually, you almost say most companies don't know why they do it.
Yep.
And it's not just to make money.
Yeah, this is not exactly, and it's not just to make money. What is your reason for getting up in the morning, right? And these are not new things. This is borrowing, frankly, very heavily from Simon Sinek, right? Who the best, I think, modern day business philosopher in the world. Where you have to start with is the true understanding and belief that your brand is what's driving sales.
Yeah.
Your brand drives sales, full stop. If your brand is explaining why you're in business, what you offer, and how you do it, and that is all in balance, sales happens. It's critical to get those three components together: your brand position, your value proposition, and that customer demand. Once those three, and there are different, certainly there are different strategies and tactics for each one of those. Like, well, how do you do your brand positioning, and how do you really identify, what your value proposition is, and what is your value proposition for this person versus that person, or this segment versus that segment,
Or the stakeholder or that stakeholder, or even within the business.
Stakeholder and that stakeholder, right? And then there's also a certain amount of technology that can help give you a lift to make all of this come together. Like, do you have a CRM? Are you using your CRM the right way? Are you disciplined in that respect? One of the things that, when Michael and I got together, and we both, I'm HubSpot certified, and Michael's an absolute wizard, with CRM, and is extremely disciplined with it. And you can start to identify those goals and those targets and those milestones, and what's going on with this conversation, and what does this deal look like, and encapsulate it all together. Because once your brand is telling the story for you, I'm not going to say the leads, I'll say that the customer demand starts to generate.
Yeah. But you can screw that up pretty well, Paul, if you don't have a good follow-up strategy, and your sales strategy has to match that messaging. Because if you come in and you're talking about how awesome this product is, and then a sales rep or a sales engineer or somebody on your customer service team goes, "What is that? What are you guys talking about over there? I have no idea." Or they're telling the opposite message, or they don't have the confidence in the product and the wisdom to understand how that solves this brand's problem. Those leads are all essentially are for naught. So, Michael, talk me through that second side of it, because I do think the messaging out is critical, but then you've got to follow through to have it turn into revenue, or it doesn't work.
A lot of this comes down to training, right? Just across the business, whether it's technical training or just messaging. And I can't tell you how many places I've been where the salespeople are making their own messages. And it's okay to write something, right? But is it on brand? Is it even what we're talking about? And so, hey, who said you could even send this out of the building? This doesn't make any sense. You just went off the reservation completely. In fact, we don't do this or this.
Yeah.
And so one is, like Paul was saying, that message, the branding isn't just about a logo. It's the language you use. It's the words. It's what our repeated statements are. What's our win statement? What are the things we repeatedly say as an organization? If I talk to you, Jeremy, and I talk to Art, or I talk to Chad, or anybody else over at CBS, they're probably, if it's doing right, they're all saying the same things in a certain way. The other is the follow-up and the execution of sales. You can have a really great marketing side of the business and dump leads off on an incompetent sales team. Not to say that they're not good at something, but they're not managing it correctly. Whether it's the follow-up, whether it's some levels of automation that at least keep that engagement moving and flowing. And the other part is, and your eyes will roll back every time I talk about CRM because I'm such a fanatic about it, right? My most recent analogy about CRM is just think about Iron Man, because I'm a comic book nerd, right?
Uh-huh.
And when Iron Man puts on his suit, what happens? Images flash on the screen.
Yeah.
Threats, opportunities, this, that. And it really is the Iron Man suit of the salesperson. It's them being able to have a heads-up display on what's going on. I can't tell you how many times I'm gonna pull up my hair if I'm on a call and somebody says, "Remind me what you're using."
Yeah.
Really, we're gonna waste this guy's time to tell us stuff we already knew.
Yeah.
And so some people look at their system as something they're a slave to. I'm gonna enter it tonight.
Yeah.
And I'm gonna do my catch-up and put it in there. Why aren't you like an Amazon operator? "Hey, Jeremy, great to talk to you. Hold on one second while I pull up your record. All right, I got everything here. Let's go ahead and have a conversation." And everything I'm not seeing, I'm rounding that off during every conversation. But it's not about fanatical data curation, right? What's the idea? The idea is that I understand who I'm talking to. I have the information I need available to me. Not only do I have it available to me, my tribe has available to them. Right? My leader, who happens to know all these people and all these businesses, has dropped in all the contacts that we could all benefit from.
Yeah.
Right.
Do you think it's even tying that message that says this message on the marketing side resonated with this prospect?
Yeah.
And now speaking to that, because again, there's so much noise and it's like, hey, I understand that you're really looking at voice AI as a critical part of your business. You've done the research, you've got the data in front of you, and now it turns into a valid conversation versus, hey, somebody told me I needed to call you. That's a very different conversation, which we've all had both sides of that. There's the little bit of the creepy from time to time where you're like, hey, you probably shouldn't know that much about me. But
Jeremy, the funny thing is like going back to the beginning of our conversation, like we're all vying for the same eyes. Like we have a very finite target audience.
A very little amount of time when we interact with them.
Yep.
Yeah.
That has to be meaningful, right?
Yeah.
But
And everybody has more on their plates than they've ever had. And so now being able to cut through that noise to ensure that you are delivering value is really critical. And if you don't, they will just start to ignore you and put you on the ignore list. And now you've lost an opportunity for somebody that you could have added value to, but you were unprepared or you didn't do your homework, you didn't do the right thing.
Yeah. Or just you're marching in the wrong direction. We're having one conversation and people coming in are having a completely different one. And the prospect or the partner is like, what the hell is going on? I thought we were on the right track. And now all of a sudden it's blown up.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Why don't you guys give our audience, for those that are hanging out, and I'll put this in the show notes as well, how do they get in touch with you guys? How do they learn more? How do they discover where Popcorn's at and how it may be able to add value to their brand and add value to their tech solution, add value to what it is that they're trying to get to market?
Thank you so much for that. You can find us simply at PopcornGTM.com and, reach out to Michael or I directly. We left the information on the screen, but you can find him at Beck at PopcornGTM or P Molinari, PopcornGTM.com.
And you can follow us on LinkedIn. We're doing blog content constantly. We are posting great articles that will help change a little bit about how you look at the world and maybe give you some useful tips.
I love it. And I know that both of you guys are pretty active out on LinkedIn as well, just on your even your own personal profiles. And so if you guys haven't already connected with both of these guys, I would encourage you to do. Guys, I know we've talked a lot, and audience, I know we've talked a lot about kind of eyeballs and people's attention, and I don't take it for granted that you guys hang out with us each and every week when we post one of these shows. Thank you to our audience. If you haven't already subscribed to the YouTube channel, if you're a YouTube viewer, if you haven't already subscribed to the newsletter once a month, you'll get an email with all of the content. I don't sell any of it. I don't put it out to bid for spammers or any of those kind of things. It's really just to make sure that you guys don't miss any of the fantastic content that's out there. Paul and Michael, thank you guys so much for your time today. And to our listeners, make it a great day.
Thank you so
Jeremy,
much,
thank you so much. And Happy New Year to you and your audience as well.
Awesome. Thanks, guys.